What do teachers and students need to bring project-based learning into the English language learning process? Jesus Huerta joins us to share some of his approaches.
Welcome to the DIESOL podcast, where we focus on developing innovation in English as a second or other language. I'm Brent Warner, professor of ESL, and I guess I got to start saying author of upcoming ISTE book as we go. More information on that later. And of course, I'm here as always with the wonderful Ishel Reyes, award-winning educator in innovation and professional development, specializing in teacher training with an EdTech focus. Ishel, how are you?
Woo! I'm great. I'm doing great.
Good, good, good.
It is
So
now November.
I know, can you believe it, right? Here we go. We are here today with Jesus Huerta. Jesus, how are you?
I am good. We were just talking about daylight savings time. I didn't realize it was, and I'm like, I'm so refreshed. I don't need that much sleep. And now I'm like, hey, you messed that up for me. So
Yeah. Welcome to the new time zone here. So Jesus, you've been an educator for over a decade, and in recent years, for anyone listening, Jesus has taken on roles as an education technology coach for Calexico Unified School District. That's way, when I say I'm in Southern California, that's real Southern California, right? Right down there on the border, and adjunct faculty at the Krause Center for Innovation. You've been an instructor for NAF Berkeley, Upward Bound Imperial Valley, and other organizations. Jesus specializes in makerspace development, professional development with a focus on technology integration and project-based learning. So if we're talking about tech-related stuff in the classroom, Jesus is the man to talk to. So Jesus, thank you so much for coming and joining us on the show.
awesome. Thank you for inviting me on. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, yeah. Part of the reason that we wanted to talk today was because you did an awesome presentation at Fall Q. So we both drove or somehow got all the way up to Sacramento, and and then you did an excellent presentation where you're talking about all this project-based learning that you're doing with your students. Can you, I guess before we get into the weeds, can you give us a broad overview of your school setup, what's happening with your students, and kind of the things that you're thinking about as you step into that class?
So right now, this is my second, this is my third year as a technology coach, but my first year, there was like a hiccup with the hiring process to find my replacement. So I was splitting my time with my sixth graders.
Mm.
Um, so right now, we have 12 schools. We're K-12. And in our elementaries, we have seven of them. And we develop maker spaces for them. There's a lot of support from our after school program for that. But really, I don't have students per se, but it's funny. I go in there, I'll do the first maybe one or two lessons of a project, and the teachers can request an activity. But I go back and the kids remember, hey, Mr. Huerta, hey. And so I still get that, cup of mind filled, interacting with students. Um, but really what I do is to prep for that, I'll talk to the teacher. I do the coaching process. Let's meet. It can be, they're super busy. But it could be via email, via text. I don't mind if they have my cell phone. Um, and really I ask them I give them the approach that I take when I do project-based learning. It's what tech do you want to learn? And I know that sounds wrong or weird, but John Carripo, him and Ascension Reyes, he's another teacher from down here. They told me one thing that I was like, you know what? Dang, that's the way I would love to learn and I'd like to learn, which is how do we get the kids engaged? Now, yeah, there's, oh, look, a little shiny object. But for me, I would always tell my students, you know what? They would see 3D printers and this and that. And I would tell them, I'm going to trick you guys. I'm going to get you guys to learn history with that 3D printer. You can't do that. And when it would happen, they would look at me kind of like, hey. So with these teachers, I tell them, look, what's the thing that catches your attention? Because if you're not hip to it, if you're not excited to teach the lesson, the kids are not going to get excited.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of my approach. And I go, okay, so what's the content you want it to fit there? And I think teachers still have that mentality of, okay, he's going to teach me how to use the equipment, but I have to develop the lesson. And I'll tell them, no, 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 no. Let me help you with that because it is a skill. Just like we ask them to build their capacity with tech, whether it's, using AI, effectively, how do I implement coding and programming? I want to use drones. They do have to learn the equipment, but they have to get comfortable enough with it, I think, to be able to look at it and say, now I'm going to use that as a teaching tool. Let me turn on my teacher vision. That's Ascension Reyes' little phrase. So for me, that's how I approach it. And I feel like I'm kind of rambling now. Sorry, I feel like I talked a lot.
No, that's great.
No, I'm hanging on to every word.
So, but yeah, that's how I approach it. And the unique thing that we have, and you mentioned, where are you at, Brent?
I'm in Irvine in Orange County.
Okay, so yeah, you're SoCal. You're still
It's
SoCal.
still SoCal. It's not so SoCal.
I'm like SoCal. Yeah, so Imperial County it's a border county, but really it's not really a phrase. It's more border towns. So you
Mm,
have San Diego, but I think it's San Isidro. I think that's the section of San Diego that's right connected to Tijuana.
right.
So here, the only town that's connected to Mexicali, Mexico is Calexico, and that's where I teach right now.
Mhm.
But you do have in the county, a large population of English language learners. But there, we have a huge population of students that either cross over daily, um, because they might go, they might live with their aunt and uncle here, but then they go back to visit mom in the evening, mom and dad. So it's a different approach for us.
Mm,
And so a lot of these kids, they don't have exposure to tech because we don't really have, and I mean, I wrote up a what is that one? Donors Choose one time. And this was in a different district, and they got a little offended because the way I phrased it, but I used students' words. They felt like there's nothing here. And they said,
mm,
well, what career can I have here if I don't want to be a teacher, if I don't want to work at the prison, or I don't want to work for the city? And I was like, that's true. There's no industry here.
mm.
So in a way, I do. Yeah, I look at the population we have. We don't have a lot of industry here. So we have a lot of fields here. And so that's the other thing I try to get teachers to understand. Like you're going to get them excited. And as they get older, they'll hopefully approach and try to, tackle that kind of career, hopefully in the sciences and tech. So, but yeah,
Nice.
that's my big thing about what's the tech that you want to use to get the kids excited, and then we'll build around it. So.
All right. So let's look at that then. So you're building you're creating project-based learning opportunities for students with tech. But how so let's get into a little bit of the practicality or the reality of it on day to day. Um, how can it enhance language learning for ELLs?
So you mentioned ELLs, English language learners. Um, for those that don't know, it's, I guess you could say like a system where how do we get them to where they're at a level of English where they're not going to need extra services, extra help, um, certain curriculum, made available to them and so on. So when they register in our district, and I think a lot of districts down here do the same thing, parents have a questionnaire. Sometimes a teacher will identify them if the parents, put something different for whatever reason. They thought, oh, well, they're at a two, or I'd speak English at home, but maybe they don't really speak that much English, the child. So you'll have a newcomer, which is one. And what we do is we give them the LPAC test. That's to test their understanding of the English language. And depending on what they score on it, they'll move up and eventually they'll test out and they're no longer labeled, ELs, English learners, English language learners. And so um, for me with project-based learning, I feel kind of like it's like math because numbers, it's its own language. But I think instinctively, kids will learn how to count. They learn how to add. If they come over and they already have some math skills, they can find some success there. And so if I tell them, all right, guys, I want you to, and I mean, I use a lot of tools like Google Translate. And it does add more work to the teacher. And that's the hard part. How
Mhm.
do I translate this? Well, great thing is now we have AI. let me translate these complicated instructions. And I'll have someone like my sister read some of these instructions. She goes, yeah, that's perfect Spanish, because she's fluent Spanish, like high level academic. Um, and so for me, if I can get them to understand, look, take this image, convert it into a 3D model, and then turn it into a keychain instead of just using what Tinkercad's great. They have a lot of cool little, they have a heart, they have this, they have different symbols. But if they can get a silhouette of, say, Spider-Man, there's a way for them to convert it into a 3D model. And so then they can make a custom keychain that's like totally unique. And it's like, well, I saw one like this and I want to, make it for my brother or for myself. I think that success of making something there, flying a drone, programming a robot to go through a maze, they're going to have struggles like getting the understanding. But if they just watch what I do on Tinkercad, they'll find success. And if you've ever been somewhere where you don't speak the language, if you've traveled internationally, you've been around people and you're like, you know what, they're speaking language, I don't get it. Or you're learning about something and you're like, well, I think I jumped into the deep end. It's intimidating. So now imagine you're 10 years old. Your first day of school, you're like, I don't know anybody and I don't know the language. And everybody is speaking a different language. So I think that builds up their confidence, but also tells them, you know what? I'm not dumb, because what's the first thing a child's going to think if they can't speak the language? They're going to think, I'm not successful. I saw my grades. I saw this. I saw that. So for me, it's another way for them to have a voice. And I think, one of the things you mentioned the presentation. Shout out to Robert Stone. He's a academic coach for us. He was able to pull all this data because he uses project-based learning, and this is his third year doing this. Um, and I told him, okay, now you got to move to a new tool, because he's been using Ozobots. And he jumped into 3D printing, and he right away got an idea for it. He wants to make little hats, and the kids design the little hats that go on top of the Ozobot, and it moves around. Um, but he mentioned the same thing. He's like, some of these kids, you know, it builds their confidence, and they're like, I can do that part. Why? Because I did this thing, or I can do that now because I can do this. And I would use the same thing with my students, even if they weren't English language learners. If they were struggling with a math concept, I'm like, really? I'm like, well, you built, this, or you programmed that accurately. You were the first one to do it. I think you could do it. And I'll just walk away and just leave that little nugget in their head, like, hey, you can do this. And yeah, it just builds their confidence. And so I think these tools, especially the ones where they're making things, there's no language barrier for them for you as the instructor or anybody else to understand, look, I was successful. It's like they did this.
Mhm.
And I think, again, it lends itself to building their confidence. And I think that's really what these students need at first, because when you're 8 years old, 9 years old, you have certain ways of thinking about yourself. If you're a teenager, you're thinking about other things. And when you're in high school, you're like, well, my future's around the corner. And this is my, junior year, but it's my first year in this country. What do you tell that student? Well, we got to get them to feel comfortable, and we got to get them to feel a little confidence in something.
So, Jesus, throughout all of these projects, how do you ensure that the students are learning or are using English?
So we have support. A lot of the ones you might hear about, they're traditional, and I ran into someone there, and they're like, it's my first year with ELLs, and they're like, I have no resources. And they said, I
Mm-hmm.
like what you mentioned, and made sure that they got the presentation, give them my card and everything. One of the things that another teacher, Mr. Ortiz, Francisco Ortiz, that he does, he tells students, record me, go to, open a doc for today, turn on the mic. It might pick up background audio. You come sit near me, so some of those students are right in front
Mm-hmm.
of him. He goes, it makes them feel safer. First of all, they're right in front of me, but
Mm-hmm.
it's translating in real time. So they can go back and go, wait, what did he say? So that's one powerful tool. He will translate it. He uses, ChatGPT. So if he has a certain set of instructions that are very academic, he'll change it over, and then he'll also ask for it to be simplified in that language, and which I think really I don't think we have anybody else that speaks a different language than Spanish. And the reason for that is, so you have academic Spanish, and then you have Spanish it's funny, you have border town Spanish. And sometimes the kids will have a certain level of Spanish, but we translate academic English into academic Spanish and they're still lost. And he's the
Mm-hmm.
first one to really tell me, you know what, when I translate it, he goes, ask for two different ways. He goes, because I want them to see that academic Spanish. He goes, but I want it broken down in a way where they'll pick it up in their language. And he goes, hopefully when they start to understand English a little bit more, they'll get it. Sitting them next to someone that speaks Spanish that can help them, just having that person, again, they feel safer, they're going to learn. So hey, the student, now we're friends because now we both, they were helping me and they speak Spanish. A lot of visuals around the classroom, in the presentations. If there's a very technical word, he'll put a explanation in Spanish and also the academic word in Spanish. We don't have anything like a curriculum per se. And I know we had talked about it before we started recording. We used to have a newcomers class. And Brent, when you said ESL, um, I remember my sister mentioning, I think she was in ESL class when she was
Mm,
younger.
mm,
If not, I'm thinking about somebody else. But yeah, in the 80s and 90s, you had a classroom and you were there all day. And I don't know if that went away, but it was just called the newcomers class now. And the one that we had was 2 years, and then you go into the regular classroom. Um, Now, you know, Excel, right? That's how you pronounce it?
Ishel.
Ishel.
Ishel. Yeah.
Ishel, if you come day one, and I'm a sixth grade teacher, you're a sixth grade
Mm.
student, come into my classroom. And that's one of the very, very stressful things for teachers right now, especially in our district and in our county. Um, it's I got to get kids ready for state testing. I got to get them engaged. I don't want to go crazy. The math scores last year were great. How do I keep it up? But the English scores were low. How do I raise them up? Because, they're up here in math. I got to get them up at least at the same level and then keep
Mm.
pushing it. Oh, and now I have a student that, guess what? They don't speak a lick of English. And guess what? Imagine you're a teacher that also doesn't speak Spanish, because we do have some teachers that
Mm-hmm.
don't speak Spanish. So I think, you hear monkey wrench, it's like throwing 10 monkey wrenches per student
Yes, it's like
to a
every
class.
curveball you could possibly
Yeah.
imagine at the poor teacher and the poor student.
uh,
So,
yeah, so this is a very complicated setup, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
you're kind of trying to
Mm-hmm.
trying to sort out how to support all the students. And then Jesus, some of you've got these really interesting projects, all sorts of different kind of setups, and I think we'll try and talk about a few of them specifically with what you do in the class. So the first one, I remember in your presentation you had, and I can't remember what the story was, so you'll have to backtrack the story on this, but you had like these different 3D printed. You mentioned the keychains. I'm not sure if they're all keychains. Like some of them look like Dungeons and Dragons
oh,
characters, or like a Sasquatch, or like a print. There's just all these different things that students are printing out. And so let's just imagine that you walk into a classroom for an ESL teacher, and or a language teacher, right? And they have a 3D printer in there. What are you going to tell them to do? Like if they're going, I got a printer, I don't know what to do with it, I want to work with my students. What kind of setups, or what kind of situations might be a good way for them to use those in the class?
I mean, if you have a 3D printer, and I know I get this question a lot, what's the best one? And I don't work for them. It's just, I see, I mean, I have fifth graders measure a prosthetic hand accurately for the smallest student in my class. And she was like 4 foot, nothing. I mean, she was tiny. And they did it accurately. It can do just about anything. Um, so if anybody's asked, the Bamboo Lab brand, they have one right now, $300. And you basically send it, it measures everything itself and just prints. There's my little spiel.
Hmm.
Um, but if they had a 3D printer, I would say just ask the students to write a story and then have them either through Tinkercad model that character, how they visualize it. And they could even use the design process. Say, all right, I want you to do a sketch first, and that's going to go with your story. And then we're going to do a 3D model, and we'll make two copies, one for you to take home, and we're going to post it here in the classroom. Or, you get to take it later. You're going to use your strategies. How can I support? Okay, I got, I got to get these kids to learn Spanish. Okay, if they're in an ESL classroom, say, they're in a district where they do have a specialized classroom. I'm hoping there's some kind of curriculum there and, they're using their strategies. But the thing is that I'll use an analogy that I use. Um, I saw a meme. It's like, somebody was meal prepping and it's like, does, salt and pepper ruin your workouts? Like, why do these people cook like a piece of chicken breast and it's the plainest looking breast and all that? The thing is, we can deliver that learning situation, whether it's math, writing, history, social science, STEAM, we can deliver it. Well, STEAM, you do have to have, well, no, I've met some teachers that didn't have any resources, but we can deliver that chicken breast. And here you go, I boiled it. Well, it doesn't taste like anything, it just tastes like chicken breast. Yeah, well, you're getting the protein, you're getting the good stuff. Or I can go, okay, how can and my son got me into cooking better. He's awesome. Awesome. Best hot wings ever I've had is him, even though I mentioned we're gonna get hot wings in a couple weeks. Um, so we can spice it up. We can add, what spices can I add to it? What sauces do I have? What starch can I add to it? Let me throw it, let me get this broccoli and throw in some butter and add some salt to it, or spice it up with some chili flakes or something. They're gonna get those nutrients, but they're gonna enjoy it more and they're gonna ask for more. So if I can say, Brent, I'm gonna have you go to. We're working on this. You're gonna write. Give me. Right now I need them to start writing their third paragraph. They're doing 2 paragraph stories. I'm getting them towards their third one. Okay. You have your sentence starters over here on the wall. So make sure you use those to help you. I have the English one and then the Spanish one right next to it, so you know what it's saying. Hopefully that's helping you. But you're going to add a new component to it. We're going to learn this program and you're going to make a 3D model. What is that? Oh, well, look, I have examples here. So, of course, having the examples out there, you could have them design it or find it somewhere. The Sasquatch you mentioned, somebody got a silhouette of a Sasquatch and they changed it into a 3D model. Um, that right there, that component of here's robotics going with your writing. Here's drones, coding and programming. You're gonna write this story, and you're gonna animate it in Scratch. That second part, they're like, oh, that sounds good. Wait, you want me to do this? Yeah, yeah. But when do I get to this? One advice to teachers is let them choose. Do you want to draw? Do you have an idea in your head for the story? Why don't you draw the character or start modeling it already? And then when you're ready, come back and start doing the story. But it's due by Friday. So I might check on you. And if I see you've been modeling for a couple days, I might kind of push you to write. But, if you want to write at home, you can. Maybe you can get some support from, somebody at home. And you'll see kids go, you know what? I'm going to write it here, but I want to do this at home. Or I'm going to switch it. Or I'm going to do a little of both. I had kids put timers. I'm going to do 10 minutes of each. Okay. I'm like, wow, they're learning time management better than I did.
That's awesome.
So I think you don't know how many teachers I hear, oh, I have a 3D printer. Let me guess, I go, it's in the box. How did you know? I'm like, because you already look like you're nervous to talk about it. So that means, out of sight, out of mind. And the first thing I tell them, take it out of the box. You have drones, take it out of the box and put it to charge, and then just turn it on.
Yeah, I love this. It's super interesting because so basically what's happening is students are out there writing a story of some level, and then they're printing elements to accommodate the story, right? So they have like little tangibles to interact with that match up with the stories that they're writing or that they're creating. So I mean, in another way of thinking about this is like how involved we got as kids and kids today too with like dolls, toys, action figures that were of things that we were familiar with, right? So it's like, oh, we got the He-Man toy or whatever else it is. And so here they're getting the option to, it might not be totally, joints and rubber bands and all those things, but they're still getting their little figures that connect them to their own stories instead of something that's just provided to them. And so that to me, I see a lot of room for, the power of making connections and being more involved with the language that they're producing as they go through that as well, right? So that's like super cool.
Right now, what you mentioned, Brent. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it just reminds me of like, I'm a big board game fan. And so when you're playing tabletop games, if you get really into them, you start collecting little characters or things to go with the game. And so
Mhm.
you have like this really strong personal connection. And so I am reminded of that.
And it's funny that you mentioned that. So, and I was gonna tell you something, Brent. Hopefully I can
Yeah.
come back. Um, in my class, we do 3 games. They do Kane's Arcade. Have you ever seen that video?
I don't think so.
Mm,
Oh, it's great. I'll send it to you guys in a bit. It's this little kid that his dad has a auto shop, part store kind of thing in LA, East LA. And he tells his dad, "Oh, I want to go to the arcade. Dad, you should put an arcade machine in here." And he goes, "Why don't you make your own?" He just said it to him kind of like in passing. And the kid started grabbing all, well, the guy has a shop, so he has a bunch of parts. Where does all the cardboard go? Oh, the kid started making his own little crane game and this and that. So my kids do that. At the end, they use Bloxels, Scratch, to make their own video game. Scratch is free, Bloxels isn't, but Bloxels requires no coding, and it's
Mm.
amazing. Um, but right in the middle, it's all the kids make their own board game. But there's a lot of writing to it because they have to write a
the
backstory.
mechanics of it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
well, I want it to be like not at the level of like say Warhammer, where basically the instruction manual is like a novel, but maybe like Settlers of Catan, something like that, like something like a boutique high-end type of board game that
Mhm.
has more to it than just here's the instruction. Hey, there's a story to this.
Mhm.
But what I tell teachers is they don't understand, the kids don't understand the level of like critical thinking, higher order thinking, and logic needed for the rule set. Because for a couple of years, so I've been teaching, you said, yeah, this is my 11th year, I think. Wow, I'm feeling old now. But I started later in life, but I started off in college wanting to be a teacher. And then I left it to go work and this and that. And I studied game design for a couple of years, right up to where I was going to start learning the coding and programming. So I learned a lot of theory, design, and all that. Like, how do you approach making a game? Um, and so that's what I want the kids to understand. Like, this is how you make a game. And so I told them, I'm gonna break your game. And some kids get like, what? You're gonna like, no. And I asked, what do I mean by break it? And they're like, you're gonna do something that's not meant to happen. And I said, yes. And what do kids want to do? They want to be first. So they'll go, oh, my game's ready. Okay. And I go on I know the direction I'm supposed to go in because I can tell how they designed it. I go the opposite direction or I jump across the board. I'm like, well, you didn't say anything. I go, it's not on the board. It's not your rules when we're looking at the prototype. Um, but yeah, that right now you mentioned board games, so that's something. And I mean, the people that are listening, if you're like, is that where I'm supposed to start? No, start with just implementing like a little piece of tech. Like, you know what? Just do Tinkercad. Don't even get a printer yet. You have to build that capacity for yourself, and then do a small project, like a 2-day one. When they do these, sometimes I would have 2 or 3 projects go at the same time. But that's just because I was like, okay, here they can grab some math, here we can grab some more math, some history, some, writing and all that. Brent, you said something earlier. I'm trying not to, you know, talk too much, but when you said earlier, your age, I'm 45. How old are you?
45.
Hey, there we go. All right. Oh yeah, we hadn't talked about that. 79. Um, Imagine if when we were younger, you said action figures. Imagine a teacher had come in and said, "All right, guys, you're gonna write a story, but then I want you to act it out." And I made like a special shadow box, and you can bring in your own action figures, and you act out your story. How much more would you have been like, "Oh man, I'm gonna make this the best story ever"?
Right, right.
And that's what I'm
Yeah.
hoping teachers will see if they implement something like project-based learning or just like project-based learning light, like a little activity, something, just something different, something innovative that the kids will be excited about.
So Jesus, you mentioned bots, and I'm just wondering if you could tell our audience a little bit about what you do with the bots.
So for those that haven't heard of Ozobots, they're tiny, tiny robots. It's like a jumbo-sized thimble. They're tiny, and they use color coding to be programmed. They have a new one that looks incredible, but we have the older ones, and it almost looks like a little bug. And depending on the colors that the kids draw, it uses those colors to move faster. It senses a combination in quick succession. It's a code for it to, dance. It can turn on lights like a cop, different things. And so what Mr. Stone was doing, um, he was having the kids take the instructions on how to use it and rewrite it, but using a lot of support. So they were using a lot of academic language like, I'm going to code it properly. The word properly, what does it mean? For us, it's like, oh yeah, I mean, it means to do it the right way, but they don't know that. But if I tell them you need to code it the right way, they go, okay, but now let me take the right way and let's use one word to say those, 3 words.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so what he noticed by implementing it as a way for them to kind of say, hey, well, teach me how to use it. Or you know what, let's write the instructions. You know what? Here's the code that you guys did. Could you guys write what each one does for me? Those little things built their language, but they were like,
Mm-hmm.
well, I know how to use this. I can write the instructions. Oh, we're going to share those instructions with, younger kids. Things like that gets them thinking, okay, so I want those kids to use it, so I better write it, well. And so the kids really focus on, let me make sure I say it right. Um, and again, it's, you can't see, I don't know if they'll see the video of this. It's literally like in the palm of my hand, tiny little robot. It's not intimidating. It's cute. So again, the kids feel safe. It's not a high cost item. And what I mean by high cost, the kid's not going to be embarrassed if they make a mistake. They're not going to go and say, well, there's only one of them. We got several of them for the kids to use. And if they make a mistake, oh, well, here, just get another sheet. Um, it's it becomes something where they're like, oh, let me just grab it and use it. And I think that's what we want to have kids understand. Like, you know what? You're going to use this. Your print didn't come out right. Okay, let's try it again. Okay, you need to land that drone there. Okay, we'll adjust your code and so on. Um, so I think what we talked about earlier, like getting kids engaged, getting them interested. Mr. Stone did that beautifully, but in a way where I wouldn't have thought about it like that because
Mm.
he's working a lot with like the lower level kids because that's one of the things he has to do. As a coach, he's supporting teachers, but the other half for him, his role changed throughout the district. All the coaches changed. They have to work with like students that are struggling at risk, but also ELLs. And so he thought, you know what? If they can rewrite the instructions as something they love, they're going to use this high level language. And the data shows, some of these kids went from, 2 to almost 4. I spoke to him Friday and he's like, oh, I got it hot off the press. It's hilarious the way he talks about it. He's like, I got it hot off the press. Check this out. He goes, I have a kid already at this level. And he goes, and we're not even in the new year yet. He goes, this kid is gonna go from 2 and get out of the program. I'm like, so you're gonna jump from 2 to they don't need this? He goes, no. He goes, the kid is doing it. And I'm like, that's a good way of saying it. Um, so yeah, it's something again that he thought about the group and he goes, I don't want to scare them. He goes, he has a makerspace. His door, he has 2 doors. One leads right into the makerspace. He's like, I'm afraid to take them in there. Don't be afraid, I said. They're gonna not be afraid. You're afraid, I said. You have to kind of get comfortable and say, okay, I'm gonna make that mistake probably. I'm gonna fall on my face. Guess what? The kids are gonna pick you up and go, oh, you should do this to fix that. Oh, you forgot to hit this switch, or is your Wi-Fi connected to the printer? That's why I didn't print, Mr. Stone. And he's like, okay. So there's things like that. So
Yeah, I love it. So I'm hearing that, I mean, when you're doing these things, make sure the students are starting to build a sense of comfort, right? Where they can kind of figure out that this is a safe space for them to start working on things, to start building up everything. And then any of the projects you can get as creative as you like, right? So there far more ways to integrate these things into language learning than you might think at first glance, all of which are just amazing ideas. I would love to keep talking about this. We're gonna have to wrap up and kind of shift gears here, but Jesus, thank you so much for sharing these ideas because I think there's a lot of ways to start opening our minds to different possibilities of using the tools that maybe we have available to us or maybe we got in a grant but haven't thought about before. And so I really want to encourage people to get creative with that out there.
awesome. Yeah, definitely.
All right, it is time for our fun finds. And seeing as I'm in Saudi Arabia at the moment, I have the Arabic Essentials playlist on Apple Music.
Ooh.
If you need something to keep you going at the gym, if you need something playing in the background that's like upbeat, but also it transports you to another world, then I really recommend it.
Arabic Essentials. When I saw you post this, I thought you meant oils at first, but this is
Oh,
music.
no, music.
Okay, so like the
Music.
must know Arabic music, I guess, is on this playlist.
Absolutely, yes.
Awesome. That's
What
actually
do
a
you
good
got?
idea because
Yeah.
I think about that too with my own students is like they don't know which are like the always talked about American songs or whatever
Mm-hmm.
or TV shows. So having a playlist like that's actually
Oh, yeah, then
cool.
your
Yeah.
students will love you if you recognize the song.
Cool. All right. So mine is you've probably seen this guy on YouTube before. He's Veritasium. He does these like kind of educational videos on different things, but he did one recently called "How Do QR Codes Work?" And
Hmm.
so, if you, most of us kind of have a little sense of how QR codes work, but he went in, interviewed the Japanese inventor of these who made the patent open, talked about how the
Yeah.
blocks individually work and like how you kind of run through it and how it's built to catch redundancies. So even if like ketchup is spilled on it, you could still read it, scan it, and read it. And then there's a secret in there, which I have not been able to unsee since, which is we all know that there are the three squares on a QR code, right? In the bottom
Mm-hmm.
left, and the top right.
Mm-hmm.
There's a secret fourth square that I had never really noticed before, and now I cannot unsee it on any QR code. So that's my little teaser. You have to watch the video to go figure out where it is and where it will always be. But it was a really interesting video. It's about 20 minutes or so. How do QR codes work from Veritasium? Jesus, what do you have for a fun find?
Wow, I want to look at a QR code right now.
Me too. It's like, wait, wait, wait. I've got to show this to my
Square? I
students
was like,
tomorrow.
wait a minute. Uh, for me, it's something I'm gonna go do with my son. Right here in El Cajon, right here in San Diego, there's a jazz band that's gonna do a tribute to Cowboy Bebop. It's my favorite anime of
Ah,
all time. It's one of his
Nice.
favorite. We watched it over the summer. Um, and it's so cool that it's just about them and they have like a little media show going at the same time. Um, the lead singer dresses like the main character from it, Spike, you know. And so my son, I saw it and I said, "Hey, do you want to go check this out?" Because he wanted to go see a different band. I think it was Smashing Pumpkins. He's getting into, 90s rock. He has a
Yeah.
guitar. That's a whole other story I could talk
the
about.
generation.
But I
Torch
said,
is
"Hey, let's
passing
let's
on.
go to this one." And it's in a small theater. It's in El Cajon, so we don't have to go deep into San Diego. And right nearby is one of his favorite places for hot wings, Epic Wings. He loves hot wings. So that's what we're gonna do in a couple weeks. That was my find. And now he wants to
Awesome.
see if there's other kind of like bands like that. So I'm like, okay,
That's cool.
yeah.
That's
Very,
very cool.
very cool.
All right. For the show notes and other episodes, check out diesel.org/112. That's for episode 112. You can find us on Threads or on Facebook at Diesel Pod, Diesel Pod,
You're
Diesel
like
Pod. Sorry,
padding it up.
My
Yeah.
Arabic pronunciation got in the way.
All right. So if you want to find me, I'm on most of the socials at Brent G. Warner. And Ishel, where are you?
You can find me at ixy_pixie. That's IXY_PIXY. And if our audience would like to get in touch with you, Jesus, is there a place you prefer for them to find you?
I use Instagram a lot, and TikTok. It's either Jesus H 1979 or Mr. Huerta's class. Or if you just look up Jesus
Okay.
Huerta, you'll probably find me. Either one of those I use, and also LinkedIn. But a lot of it is, I post like videos and stuff like that on Instagram and TikTok.
Very cool. So hit him up. Go see everything cool that he is doing.
Awesome. Thanks everybody so much for listening. We will see you next time on episode 113. Here we go.